In the heart of Council Bluffs, Iowa, the morning air was crisp, and the usual hum of the local diner mirrored Margaret Rowe's routine stops for breakfast. To the untrained eye, Margaret appeared like any other patron, unremarkable in her simple sweater and jeans, nursing a cup of coffee. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy lay a woman caught in an escalating storm. Her fingers tapped nervously against the mug, a subtle testament to the anxiety that had become as constant as the sunrise. Margaret's eyes darted around the room, meeting those of Alice, her closest confidant. Over whispered exchanges above clinking cutlery, Margaret confided her fears. "It's getting worse," she admitted, her voice barely above a breath. "I can't stay with him anymore." Alice nodded, understanding all too well the depths of Margaret's plight with Thomas Bradley. Margaret revealed a secret plan she had been nurturing, a plan to leave Thomas, whose temper had grown increasingly unpredictable. "I've saved enough to move," she whispered, hope and trepidation mingling in her words. This clandestine conversation marked the beginning of a pivotal week, as Margaret steeled herself for what she hoped would be her escape from a life of volatility. As dawns turned into dusks, May 6th loomed ominously ahead. At Bradley's residence that evening, the tranquility of the neighborhood was shattered by raised voices. Witnesses later recounted a cacophony of arguments seeping through thin walls, each account differing slightly in detail but unified by one disturbing image: Margaret's pained cries. Inside, Margaret and Thomas's argument escalated into physical violence. Neighbors recalled seeing Margaret clutching her arm as they exited Bradley's home together. Her face bore fresh bruises, a silent testament to the turmoil that had unfolded behind closed doors. This was the last time anyone would see her. As investigators pieced together these fragments, the inconsistencies in witness accounts muddied their understanding. Some heard only muffled shouts, while others claimed to have seen more. None could agree on exact details. Despite these inconsistencies, one fact remained starkly clear. Margaret left with Thomas that night. This revelation propelled investigators into exploring deeper waters, the intricacies of Margaret's relationship with Thomas. He had shown cooperation initially, but his demeanor shifted sharply when pressed for details about that night. His stories twisted under scrutiny like leaves caught in a storm. With each passing day that Margaret remained missing, urgency and fear gripped Council Bluffs tighter. Rumors whispered like autumn leaves across lawns. Suspicions hardened like frost on window panes. Then came an unexpected lead. A neighbor mentioned seeing Thomas digging late into one night shortly after Margaret vanished. The sighting was brief and vague, but enough to reignite suspicions. As detectives prepared to revisit Bradley's property armed with this new insight, another chilling discovery emerged. Letters penned by Margaret herself. They were filled with expressions of fear and plans for escape written before her disappearance, but found only now. The letters painted a vivid picture of a woman desperate to reclaim her life, yet shrouded in shadows cast by fear. Each sentence seemed to echo with an unspoken plea for safety. As investigators stood at the precipice of these revelations, questions loomed larger than answers. What did Thomas bury that night? Were these letters truly a cry for help, or a mere coincidence? The search intensified as hopes dwindled, a race against time in which every second ticked away like thunder before a storm. And yet, just as they prepared to confront Bradley anew with these findings, another shadow fell upon the case, a shadow that promised more darkness before any light could emerge. As dawn broke over Council Bluffs, the shadows from Margaret's letters lingered heavily, casting doubt and suspicion over the town. Investigators pored over her words, searching for context and meaning hidden within the inked pages. The letters spoke of fear, an unrelenting anxiety that gnawed at Margaret, fueled by her volatile relationship with Thomas Bradley. The investigation led detectives to revisit Thomas Bradley's house, seeking to unravel the complexities of their tumultuous relationship. As they walked through the modest home, echoes of their past interactions seemed to cling to the walls. Witness statements from neighbors painted a stark contrast to Bradley's claims of peaceful coexistence. They described shouting matches so fierce they could be heard clearly from the street. Inside Bradley's house, investigators discovered a journal tucked away in Margaret's belongings. The pages were filled with accounts of domestic violence, each entry a chilling testament to her growing fear. The diary entries detailed arguments that escalated into physical altercations, revealing a pattern of abuse that contradicted Bradley's narrative. This discovery added a new layer of complexity to the case, hinting at potential motives behind Margaret's disappearance. It provided a glimpse into the terror she lived with daily and hinted at an imminent escape plan thwarted too soon. With these revelations fresh in their minds, detectives found themselves back at the police station, preparing to revisit Thomas Bradley's initial interviews. In the stark, sterile confines of the interview room, Bradley's demeanor shifted uneasily between cooperative and defensive as officers pressed him for details about that fateful night on May 6. Bradley spoke in circles, his words tangled like vines, offering exaggerated alibis that only deepened their suspicions. He claimed he had been out drinking with friends all night, a statement that witnesses contradicted. Some saw him arguing with Margaret outside his house, while others reported seeing him alone much later. His conflicting statements painted a picture of someone desperately trying to mask the truth. Each new inconsistency was like a brick added to the wall of doubt growing around him. The tension in the room was palpable as officers laid out evidence contradicting his alibis. Margaret's journal entries, neighbor testimonies, and his own discrepancies all pointed towards a more sinister narrative than he was willing to admit. As the interview wore on, Bradley's facade began to crack under pressure. His defensiveness gave way to silence, a silence heavy with unspoken truths and possible deception. Detectives knew they were inching closer to something significant, something buried beneath layers of lies and half-truths. They decided it was time for more detailed investigations into his whereabouts on May 6th. Just as they prepared for this next step, an unexpected phone call interrupted their plans. A neighbor had come forward with new information. They claimed they had seen something suspicious near Bradley's property on the night Margaret disappeared, activity that suggested a desperate attempt to hide something. This revelation hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst, promising more darkness to come before any light could break through. As officers raced against time to follow this lead, the weight of what they might discover loomed large. A truth buried not just in earth, but in secrets long kept hidden. The chapter closed on this ominous note, a cliffhanger that left everyone questioning what lay beneath Bradley's carefully constructed facade. The air in Council Bluffs was tense, thick with expectation and unspoken fears as detectives drove toward the local bar, the last place Thomas Bradley claimed to have been on May 6th. Eyewitness accounts from neighbors had already painted a grim picture, but inconsistencies lingered like shadows. Their mission today: gather more testimonies, peel back the layers of Bradley's narrative. Inside the dimly lit bar, a haze of cigarette smoke hung in the air, and the clink of glasses offered a backdrop to murmured conversations. The detectives approached patrons slowly, gauging reactions. Many eyed them warily, whispers trailing behind like cautious echoes. Bradley's reputation preceded him, a volatile man not easily crossed, and this made witnesses hesitant. Finally, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source: the bartender, a weathered man whose eyes held stories untold. Bradley came in here that night, he recalled, voice low and steady. He was agitated, seemed off. His clothes were dirty, stained even. This contradicted Bradley's alibi of a relaxed night out with friends. The bartender's words were like pebbles thrown into still water, rippling through the room. This revelation added weight to the suspicions circling Bradley. As they left the bar, detectives were more convinced than ever that his story was unraveling. Each new detail drew them closer to the truth buried beneath his lies. Their next destination was Bradley's residence, driven by whispers of a buried object that could hold the key to Margaret's disappearance. The neighborhood was eerily quiet as they approached the backyard, an ordinary space now laden with sinister possibilities. Bradley met them at the door, his demeanor oscillating between defiance and denial. "I don't know what you're talking about," he insisted when confronted with tales of late-night digging. His protestations were met with skepticism. Despite his obstruction, investigators moved cautiously through the property. Their eyes scanned for anomalies in the landscape. A patch of uneven soil hinted at recent disturbances, but offered no immediate evidence without proper excavation tools or legal permission. "We need a warrant," one detective murmured to his partner as they regrouped near their car. The need for concrete proof weighed heavily. The tension wound tighter with each passing moment. As they prepared to leave for now, a neighbor's voice carried over from across the street, a simple observation about seeing Bradley carrying something heavy into his garage late that night. It was enough to deepen their resolve. These findings set the stage for what was to come. Bradley's narrative had more holes than answers now. Investigators knew they had to act quickly before any potential evidence vanished or was altered. The chapter closed as they drove away from Bradley's home, minds racing with possibilities and strategies for their next steps. An examination of Margaret's apartment awaited them, its silence possibly hiding clues that could illuminate this dark mystery. As dusk settled over Council Bluffs once more, an urgency pulsed through the team, a race against time and truth gathering speed like a storm just beyond sight. But just as certainty seemed within reach, another call interrupted their plans. A report from nearby officers about suspicious activity near Bradley's property after they left, further indications that secrets were being concealed in plain sight. This new lead loomed large, a cliffhanger promising further twists ahead as investigators braced themselves for what lay beneath layers of deceit and silence. The echo of footsteps faded away as investigators departed Thomas Bradley's property, their minds whirring with possibilities. The report of suspicious activity after their visit lingered ominously in the air, urging them forward. Their next destination, Margaret Rowe's apartment, promised another puzzle piece in this tangled mystery. Upon arrival, the stark silence of the deserted apartment was unsettling. The door creaked open to reveal a space frozen in time, Margaret's belongings neatly arranged as if she might return any moment. Yet the air was heavy with absence, her presence a mere shadow that clung to the walls. The lack of forced entry was perplexing. Everything seemed orderly, almost too carefully left behind. Detectives moved through the rooms methodically, searching for any indication of Margaret's state of mind or plans. In the small bedroom, a diary lay on the nightstand, a silent witness to her final days. Flipping through its pages revealed entries marked with urgency and fear. Margaret's writing spoke of her escalating dread and outlined her resolve to escape Bradley's grasp. Each page was an echo of her desperation and a testament to her precarious situation. Armed with this new insight, detectives knew they needed more context, more voices that might illuminate Margaret's hidden fears. They resolved to speak with her family next, hoping for additional clues that could unravel this complex web. At a family member's home, the atmosphere was thick with grief and frustration. Margaret's relatives gathered, eyes weary from sleepless nights and unanswered questions. Their initial distrust was almost palpable. Years of feeling sidelined by law enforcement had left them guarded. "We need your help," one detective implored gently. "Anything you can share about Margaret's state of mind could be crucial." After a pause heavy with consideration, one family member sighed deeply and spoke up. They admitted receiving cryptic notes from Margaret, messages hinting at her fear and suggesting she felt threatened by Thomas Bradley. The notes were fragmented but conveyed a clear message. Margaret was living in constant fear for her safety. These revelations painted a vivid picture of Margaret's life on the edge and spurred detectives to seek out those who might have witnessed more than they realized. Friends and neighbors who could shed light on Bradley's behavior leading up to her disappearance. As detectives prepared to broaden their investigation, a new urgency took hold, a need to track down every thread before it slipped through their fingers. The community was tight-knit. Surely someone else had noticed something odd, some detail that could tip the scales toward truth. Just as they strategized their next moves, another call disrupted their thoughts. A neighbor had reported seeing someone skulking around Bradley's property again after dark. This recurring theme of secretive activity suggested layers yet unexplored. The chapter closed on this ominous note, a cliffhanger that left everyone questioning what lay hidden beneath the surface of Bradley's carefully maintained facade and what truths were yet to be unearthed in this chilling mystery. The night air was heavy with anticipation as detectives returned to the neighborhood surrounding Thomas Bradley's residence. The earlier report of suspicious activity had cast a long shadow over the investigation, pulling them back with renewed urgency. Settling on a neighbor's porch, they hoped to gather more details about Bradley's potential late-night activities. The neighbor, an older man with a wary gaze, hesitated before speaking. "Most folks around here keep to themselves," he began, voice low and cautious. "But that night, it was different. I heard noises, digging noises, coming from Bradley's yard. It was late, too late for yard work." His words hung in the air, painting a picture of clandestine actions shrouded in darkness. Fearful murmurs had circulated among the neighbors, he continued. Bradley's erratic behavior had frightened some into silence. Yet, the witness's account of hearing digging was irrefutable, suggesting something significant lay hidden beneath Bradley's property. This revelation reignited a simmering suspicion and provided the impetus needed for investigators to push for a search warrant that had previously been denied. Back at the police station, detectives turned their attention to the letters found in Margaret's apartment. The evidence room was dimly lit, casting shadows over the scattered documents as they were examined with renewed focus. Each letter was a vivid testament to Margaret's turmoil and fear of Bradley. One letter stood out, a chilling note that detailed a direct threat from Bradley, insisting she could not leave him. The implications were stark. This was not just a case of domestic unrest, but one potentially driven by desperation and control. Why weren't these letters handed in sooner? One detective wondered aloud, frustration evident in his tone. It remained an unanswered question that added another layer of complexity to Margaret's disappearance. As they pieced together fragments of her life from these letters, the overarching narrative painted a grim picture, a woman trapped by fear, silenced by threats. This discovery established a clear motive and brought the investigation to a pivotal moment, confronting Bradley once more. Was there enough to justify his arrest? The decision weighed heavily on the team, a morally charged dilemma that underscored the stakes at hand. They knew any misstep could cost them dearly, yet inaction could be worse. With daylight fading into dusk, detectives drove back towards Bradley's property, armed with their newfound knowledge and resolve. A search warrant now seemed within reach, promising to peel away layers of mystery that had enveloped this case. As they arrived at Bradley's home, tension was palpable, an electric charge in the air as they prepared for confrontation. Inside, Bradley sat unperturbed, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm brewing outside. Detectives laid out their findings, witness testimonies of digging noises and Margaret's letters detailing his threats. His reaction was unexpected. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face before settling back into defiance. "You have no proof," he declared, voice steady, but eyes betraying unease. The confrontation marked a turning point, an acknowledgement of truth, yet not quite an admission. With each word exchanged, it became clear this mystery would not unravel easily. As officers stood poised on this precipice of revelation or retreat, one chilling realization lingered. Justice was elusive here in Council Bluffs. Shadows forever cast long over truths half buried and voices long silenced.